Hello and welcome back to the Guns and Glory Show. It is October 5th, 2025. I've been kicking this old thing around. I call it a old fart cart for a long time. And I'm going to make a first-person view radio control airplane cockpit out of this thing with a stick and a rudder control, and a throttle, and a little switchboard for flaps, lights, landing gear, stuff like that. I had originally shot the intro to this video probably a year ago, and I went back in the phone to retrieve it and to start making this video, and it told me I couldn't get to it because I'm not connected to the internet. That's my video on my phone. I shouldn't have to connect to the internet to get to it. But nevertheless, I'm done paying for the cloud. I sure miss the days when music and videos used to work on a computer. I got this frame. It was in another car. It had mounted a radio amplifier on it. I think it was in the Blazer. I don't remember. Yeah, I think it was. Anyhow, these things are used to bind up a load, and I think they're going to make a pretty good pair of rudder pedals. And with the two holes in the bottom of them, I'm not going to have to weld them. I'll just be able to bolt them together and that'll work. These will pivot up independently and they're already spring loaded, so I can put a little tension on it and they will feel a little bit more realistic. Rudder pedal assembly is coming along great. I've just got to get two sides to do the same thing. And with these two springs on each one of them, I've got a good enough tension for the foot, but not enough to, make you tired. I've got to weld these two little spring retainers onto that plate, and I can cut a little slot, one for each side of that spring in the top, and that'll capture them. Then I've got to get a gimbal and then figure out how to cable it over to control that gimbal. I've got the keepers cut into the rudder pedals so the springs don't go anywhere, and you can use that to control the height of those. As you can see, they will come out if they go up too high, so I'm going to put some kind of a cable in there to retain it. But those work very well. Instead of using a couple of cables to limit the upward travel of the rudder pedals, I'm going to make a bracket that causes that to stop right there. And I'll have to attach it to the frame with a bolt because you can't really weld in there. Torch can't breathe. Looks like one of those brackets, placed very precisely right about there, will keep that from coming up too far. Well, that worked very, very well actually. And you put the two nuts on one side, you don't even need them on the other, and you can lock them together that way. But those springs are now captured. If I want to take them out and change them, I can, but nevertheless, for now, they're stuck. I need to make a throttle control for this cockpit. Been messing around in the junk pile for a couple hours, and I come up with a barn hinge stuck to a pipe. Now there's a hole in each side of this pipe, so I was able to keep track of the center of it really easily. Just cut a slot in there with a die grinder, drive the hinge into it. I'll weld it on both sides so it won't move. And we've got the beginnings of a throttle control. Now I need to build a little frame for the throttle control, and it'll double as like an armrest. Grab a piece of that stuff, box it in like an old erector set. Well, the basic frame of the throttle is completed. I'll have to put a couple of return springs on it and a couple of limit stops. I really need to pick up 3 gimbals. The throttle and rudder will be 2 different gimbals, and elevator and aileron will be on one, probably with a side stick I'll try to make a joystick in the center, but probably a side stick. I've installed a couple of springs to keep it in the center of where I would like it to be. Nice comfortable angle. I'll put a sleeve guard on it, but that'll work really well for a throttle control. The rudder pedal assembly and the throttle control assembly for this radio control airplane cockpit are both roughed in. You know why they call it a cockpit, right? Well, that's like a little tiny pit where the pilot works, and pilots are dicks. December 17th, 2025, I'm working on the throttle control for the FPV cockpit. I got a gimbal out of the FlySky transmitter that came with the Prodigy. I need to get a Hall gimbal for the FreeSky transmitters. Those are 65 bucks. I don't feel like charging that right now. What's got to happen is this throttle arm and this throttle arm have to line up, and the pivot has to line up, or things will bind up. Now, the pivot for this gimbal is under that black and red wire. It's shining down there. Only fun part is this doesn't line up with the center of the pivot, which means it's going to be a little bit wonky. So a direct solid mount would never work in a situation like this. It'll bind up. You're going to need some kind of a fork to bridge the gap between the two so they move together. I need to set the throttle at idle and then line it up about like that and make a bracket to hold that gimbal in place so that those can travel together. I also need to verify that it'll move throughout the full travel, which this will. I checked that out in the vise back there. Like I said, I really need to get a Hall gimbal to do any more with that, because I basically got to make the 4 corner screws go through a plate to hold the thing at the correct angle, and I gotta know what side the plug goes and all that stuff. So I'm gonna move over to the rudders. I'll go to the dryer shut off. This is a little bit harder, in that this motion needs to do that, and this motion needs to do that. So I'm gonna have to make some kind of a bell crank thing. So I'll need a pivot pin, and I don't know yet, maybe a cam. I don't know. We'll figure it out. Whatever I do, both of the sides of these things need to connect at this point, so that when I move that one down, that one goes up. I think starting with one of those all the way down and the other one all the way up is going to be advantageous. And I'm considering this idler pulley from a truck as some sort of center pivot. I think I'm going to use a bar across that in such a way where it makes a teeter-totter. Had to straighten this thing out with that thing. It's called a rosebud for the torch. It makes a heck of a fire. I came from a trailer that my grandfather had built, I think in 1928. No, I think he used a 1928 Oldsmobile front end. That's what it was. I don't know when he built it. All right, anyway, I need to put a pivot right in the center of that to follow the action of those pedals. And this guy is bored. I guess I'll have to go play with it. Okay, I've been working on this connector bar, for lack of a better term. And I got hold of a couple of bearings, and I cut a little step in that. I'm going to seat that bearing. I wish they were a little tighter, but they don't really need to be. I found that, which just stops that on the inner race in just the right spot for me. And I've got 2 of these that I can use for jam nuts. Tighten those against each other and they stay put. So this is giving me a spot where I can get a hold of this and this with like a U-shaped bracket that I can then attach to that right And that amount will pivot on that bearing. I gotta go find whatever that is going to be. That's something kind of promising here for this fork. Some kind of, probably from a snowblower or something, I ain't sure. Anyway, it fits in there pretty good. It's a little snug, so I'm gonna have to open it up a little bit with a grinder, but that's not a big deal. All right, let's see if this thing works. I suppose I should stick a bearing in there and a washer and another bearing and another washer. I haven't tried to put this together yet. Pretty snug. Bring a slave. Be a pen design to line things like this up. I should have thought of that. Prior planning prevents best work performance. And there you go. Seriously. You're giving me a hard time because I'm on YouTube. I could probably just stake those. Yeah, let's try that. Okay. Put a bearing in it. Get a punch. And you're going to want to whack it. I wish now that I hadn't taken that bevel off of there, but I did. Give it a good whack on 8 sides on this case because I've got the bevel. Otherwise 4 would probably be fine. And try to be careful not to crush the race. Like I almost did on that one up there. That bearing is staked, stuck, and functional. So I need that spacer to cover the inner race, but not the outer race. And I've had to drill a couple of those out with a step bit to get it to work. Okay, let's see if we can get a rough assembly here. We've got a washer on both sides of those bearings, and all that goes into that fork. I've got 4 of them washers stacked up on there, and the rest of it goes in that slot for the fork. Now I reckon I got to make a couple more of these washers. Yeah, I'll have to open up probably 3 or 4 of those, and then I can tighten that down. Lock the washer in the vice grip, grab a step bit, and I got 1 step bigger, just like that. As I said before, I need a few of those, so we'll be back. Looks like I'm onto something here. Actually, I knew that or I wouldn't be on the trail still. You can find out how far down that goes, just compare that opening, the distance between the 2 parts. And then we'll see if we're losing too much of it because of this thing in here. Actually, no. And there's still enough room for that to function. So, whoops, I think we got something solid here. That's threaded. So I suppose I'll drill through there and just put a bolt through it. And probably all I need to do. I might just tack weld it right there so make sure it doesn't move. I'd like this thing to fly for like thousands of miles without wearing it out. The one that I saw in flight test was bad, but I want mine built a little bit more sturdy than that. Okay, that turned out really well. I had to put a little stack of washers behind it, but whatever. It doesn't move laterally very far at all, and I have to put a spring under each side of it and force it up against the pedal. Then I can start messing with the gimbal. Yeah, so earlier I figured I was going to put a spring underneath each one of these to keep them in contact with that, but that doesn't work. It's just going to keep them nice and steady in the center. Sometimes you don't see things until you be a little bit farther down the road. However, I need to hook that into that plate, one of those on each side, and that will push those two down into that and keep them locked together. Okay, I tried that spring through there to there, and it worked okay, but it was just way too much resistance and it restricted the motion too much. So instead of connecting these two, I'm gonna connect these two. See how that goes. Gotta do it on both sides. I had a little bit too much side-to-side play here, so I grabbed this thing. I don't know what it's from, and I figured it'll make a pretty good guide. I can easily attach it to that plate. That'll keep it in line. I figured it out. Instead of using a spring to connect these two, I just created a link with a coat hanger for now. I'll make it heavier in a minute. You just go through a hole here, up, and then through a hole there. Make a mirrored part for the other side, and we've got it. I found a long bolt from an electric motor, and I figured that ought to work. And to make it symmetrical, this is how I made it. Then I'll lop it, put one on the one side and the other on the other. I might have to take this thing apart in order to put that in there. I was able to get that link in place, and I did have to take it apart to do it, but it's just a matter of taking the jam nut and the nut off of that hoop and pulling those two off, hooking it up, put it back together. I got to do the other side. Okay, that mechanism works perfectly. Now I just got to figure out how to hook the gimbal up to it. I think this is going to be relatively straightforward. I'm going to make a little hole in the end of that, and then it'll just kind of, you know, it'll track along in there. I may have to change the length of this in order to make sure that we don't go too far and that we have full travel on the gimbal. The other problem is that I'm going to have to go get 2 Hall gimbals, and that will be the gimbal that is in the FrSky transmitters, and I'll need 3. Luckily the transmitter comes with 2. I don't want to take that one apart, which means I'm going to have to buy another transmitter. Finally gave in and had to order one of these gimbals to make this project go. It's one of those Hall gimbals from FrSky. It's fully adjustable, got 10 ball bearings in it, and it's all aluminum. Very sturdy. I've been messing around with the FlySky transmit gimbal when I took that transmitter apart, trying to figure this thing out. I'd like to make some kind of a machine, so when I move the stick, it obviously moves that thing 1-to-1 without just directly attaching it to this thing. But it's heavy duty enough where I think it might work, and I have an extra, so I'm going to try it. If it doesn't work, then I'll go back to making my Rube Goldberg device. So I started looking around the garage for stuff. Maybe a nut that I could weld to a pipe, get things started that way, or a pipe that I could put over the thumb screw, and I found it. There's a carbon fiber rod. That's a good place to start for something like that. I'm going to keep the weight down. And it's not a rod, it's actually a tube. It was the wing spar from that Prodigy up there. And it fit that thing so well, I was quite surprised. So I reckon I could just epoxy that thing in there. Maybe put a set screw or something in it, keep it from moving. We'll thread that together, and then I figure out how long I gotta make it. If you make it too long, not only got leverage down here that can break stuff, you gotta move a long ways to get the thing to work. That's already farther than I would like to go. You get it too short, and you're just gonna crank on your wrist. Or I might put a ball on it, like the reloading bench. It's ancient technology, but it's very effective, so I might try it. I found a little switch that fit in that tube like a glove. I could stick it in there with some epoxy, and I'll drop a bomb with it. I found this other little switch. It's a momentary and a little contact. I could maybe make a trigger, shoot off a rocket or something with it. We'll see. I found a nice piece of steel to mount the gimbal on for the aileron elevator control. However, I don't have any practical way to make a hole in it that size. I've got a hole saw smaller and one bigger, so I'm gonna get the Dremel tool and continue on around like I started. That'll take a couple hours. Then I'll have to file it smooth. Drill out on the inside of your lines and then follow up with a chisel and then a file. Yay, now we get to clean that up. It isn't exactly perfect, but for what we're dealing with here, I can't complain. One quick coat of paint, that thing's a lot more convincing. Yeah, I'm gonna use a side stick position instead of mounting it over here in the center. It'll be more comfortable and it'll allow me to put an armrest over here that'll take the tension off of both me and the joystick. But I think I better skip ahead and start building the cart because I'd like to be able to rotate this so that it's in the most comfortable position to use, and I can't do that unless it's bolted down. That piece of steel came from a snowblower that Dad had bought in 1964. It worked until I bought the one I've got now. I just bent that over that spare piece of whatever that stuff is. Anyway, with the gimbal setting in the right spot, it lines up pretty well. I can't hold 15 things at once, but minimum to maximum, there's just about perfect. Of course, I'll put a hard stop on both ends of it to make sure the gimbal stays protected. I decided since I had to bolt that in there anyway, I might as well put it on a pivot and make it semi-adjustable. So I'll stick a Sharpie in that next hole over and then move it, and that'll create a curve which I can turn into a slot. Okay, I figured out how to make that slot. I started off by drilling a hole in it to get that lined up. Put that in there and start it spinning. While I just push down on that and hold it up against it so that I don't drill down through the bottom of that. It's gonna hog it out a little bit. That should do it. Working on this joystick again. I found the same type of switch as the blue one, but it had a wire attached to it, so I grabbed it. I figured the best way to attach the switch to that tube is with a piece of heat shrink tubing. That way it's serviceable. Now this is a grip from an electric fence. It's usually spring loaded so you don't zap yourself when you're opening the gate. I trimmed it out with a razor knife yesterday to fit the thumb. That way I can have easy access to that switch for the bomb drop. And I've got 4 of these contact switches, different sizes. And like I said, I'm gonna try to put a trigger right here. So we'll have the bomb drop and a trigger. And since that rod comes through there at such an angle, I have to do this now because that will significantly affect the angle of that plate and the gimbal. That worked out. I can get it off of there if I need to. In order to figure out where I wanted it, I just got a hold of it like that. And I'll make a slot in the grip about 2 fingers deep and as wide as the switch. I have to figure out how to make a pivot at the bottom of a trigger that doesn't really exist yet. I got this over here in the sun so everybody could see it. I'm gonna try to leave a little material on that so that it's all more solid up there, and probably use the cutout for the trigger. I think the best way to use a pivot is just not to cut the thing off. It's rubber after all. I'll just make it a little bit skinnier so that it will move in that slot. Now, the only way this is all going to fit in there is if I cut a notch for that switch so that I can kind of set it down in there a little bit, and it has to be just below that so that I can tuck the wires in behind. Okay, this is as tight as I can make it fit, and I think it worked out pretty well. Now I got to figure out, I'll have to redo my heat shrink tape thing. Now I got to figure out how to get it into here. I figured originally I was just going to split the wire and then feed that up and out, put the tube in, and then put this back in through the trigger hole. But I got lucky and figured out if I push the trigger down, it'll just fit in there. I was able to attach both of those switches with some heat shrink tubing and capture that cable at the back with it, and I've got a pretty good skeleton here. That went in there easily enough. I'll have to shove that forward with something and anchor it, but I think we got something that's workable here. All right, this will work. I've got a piece of a 3D print that didn't work, and I shoved it in there just to move everything forward as far as it could go. That way the thumb trigger's in the right spot. And that's stiff enough where you're just not going to trigger it by accident while you're flying it around. I think a little bit of JB weld in there, top and bottom, that way I can smooth that back out. Will be the right way to deal with this. However, serviceability will be more difficult. Already got the JB weld mixed up to save a little bit of time. And I got gloves on because part of this is about to get a little bit messy. You'll see how in a minute. So we try to put a little bit on here just as a base layer. And if I get any, well, I'm going to get JB weld on the outside of this thing. I'm not too worried about it because it'll just wipe out with alcohol or goof off. I'm not really worried about that handle chemicals. I need something thinner. Hold on. All right, here we go. Cram that crap down in there. And I'll do the other side as well. And I'm going to save a little bit of the space with some paper. That way it doesn't cost like $100 in epoxy to do this whole project. You'd be surprised what something like that'll do. A little piece of toilet paper and something like that, or paper towel even. I'll stick another one in there in a minute. However, handling it once you get a little bit of this stuff on your gloves is a little bit fun. It's a whole lot cheaper than epoxy. And that'll turn into a little rock. Let's try to keep the wires out of that. You got a couple hours to work with this stuff, so it's good. Just smooth that in there a little bit. A little bit of pressure. Shove that material down in there. And I don't even care if it stays on that rim just like that. I wasn't planning that out, but that's where that's gonna go. We'll clean this up down there and then the rim on top and call it a day. Try not to obliterate our switch. Oops. I'll make too much of a mess in there. Shove that around a bit. Get that on that 3D printed thing that's sitting inside of there. I think one little piece of paper in there. Oop. That'll get it. There. I'll make a nice little base for the epoxy. Build that up. Kind of work from the back towards the front again, so I don't foul up that switch. Because if I do, there will be more than foul for an F word around here. And I do hope that's in the frame, because I ain't reshooting this. All right, I'm just gonna go get a little towelette. clean that up. And that stuff right there works wonders on just about everything. It'll clean up nice. Anyway, you get the idea. I'd say that'll do it. I just got to stay out of the epoxy until it dries. I did clean the rim off of there because I figured that'll be thin, it'll break off and make these sharp little shards that just kind of get everywhere. The throttle control is a little bit too stiff, so I put lighter springs in it. That'll work better. It's a little bit more floppy, but I don't think that's going to be relevant. I've been watching this thing move, and I had the gimbal sitting on the plate approximately where it needs to be, and where it needs to be is directly in line with that axle shaft and the pivot in the gimbal that controls that motion. That needs to be lined up. And what also needs to happen is I need to change this so that this plane is lined up with the center of that axle. Right now it's lined up at the bottom of it. In order to do that, I suppose I could put a piece of something across there so I can heat that right there, and then pull that over it, causing it to bend until I can line that up straight. At which point I can start to put like a fork across there that will move the gimbal on the transmitter. And then once that happens, I can start putting limits on it. That looks just about like it worked perfectly. And I'm pretty sure it'll hold up to the heat. If you're not looking at that through a camera, don't look at the blue part. Heat that up there, heat that up there. Now that's going to have zinc on it because it's galvanized. And do not breathe those vapors. That's really bad for you. You just need to cherry it. Then I'll have to step in front of the camera to move this thing. Ain't there yet. Now this piece of steel here that I'm heating up is also protecting the other side of that. Up a little, so that it doesn't uncurl when I pull on it. Get that a little hotter, a little faster. That punch is pulling the heat off of it. The trouble is that's thin, and those are a long ways apart. Yeah, I'm gonna have to reset the springs when I'm finished with it too. There, almost. I guess I won't have to get my way. I want more of a bend on that side though. Oh, that would go up. I don't want that getting down. That's better. A little more on both of them. This will impart a little bit of a twist in it. Yeah, careful with it. Don't necessarily want that. Yeah, that's great. That's really good with it. Old Jed Clampett's doing some hot duty today. I did end up putting a little bit of epoxy there to kind of connect that trigger to the switch, and it turned out to be a really good idea. I have to move that up and down more, and I frankly didn't like the job I did on that, so I cut it off. If I do something that's not up to my standard, I will redo it, but I have to make that into a slot in a different kind of shape anyway. meanwhile, I'm trying to punch that hole through there. It's not as bad as you think once you get going. Okay, I'll try not to make everybody dizzy. We take a square and then mark from the center of that circle. And then I can take the gimbal, which has, we need that thing to be square with this and that, but that has to be 90 degrees from that at center. So in order to do that, I've got a square and I marked the center of that circle. Now the other thing that I have to do is line up the shaft with the shaft that runs through here. So in order to do that, whoops, try not to scratch that thing all up. All right, put that in there, and then I measure from the bottom of the plate to the center of that pin, and then I need to transfer that mark down. Now, I happen to be about the same width of that stick, so I was able to get a line there. And then from this side, transfer that mark here and here. That'll give me the center, how that located that hole. And when I sighted down through there with a flashlight, I hit my mark. From here, I can line up that hole with the center of that axle and find 90 degrees there and bolt it down. I got that thing bolted in, and it travels. Let's see if we can do this. Nope, that's just kind of hard to do. Anyway, it does line up correctly. I just got to make a connecting fork and then the end stops. So now I need to connect these two, and I figured the best way is with some kind of a fork. These ought to move together. And I need to make the end stop for that direction and that direction, but we'll worry about that later. I'm thinking this is the top of one of them file folder things. And if I bend that around, I can make a fork out of it. So if you start like this, keep an eye on you're trying to put these two ends together. Let the center take care of itself like that, and then squeeze it like that. Okay. Now we got to move it over to the vise, because I already got this set up. Before we get too carried away, it's going to wind up like that, and then pinch around that stick right there. It's a little bit hard to explain, but I think I'll manage. I need to bend this thing around a bar that's about the same diameter as the transmitter stick. If you squeeze something like that, it's going to scoot it forward, and you'll end up with a shape like this thing. That's not what we want. It's too loose anyway. So how do we fix it? You got to get a hold, you got to control this piece so that it can't move. We can't let the bit slide back. We can stop that with the jaws of the vise. I'll explain that in a second. We can't let this thing move down away from it, which it's going to try to do when you squish it. So I got to make a block to keep it from going that way. Now, if I get a hold of the workpiece with the jaws between about 5/8 down the curve here and about 7/8, it will cause a lot of pressure there. You know, it's kind of hard to explain this, but just watch it happen. Hold on. All right, I push that down in there, and that right about there. It's kind of a one-shot deal thing, and that should form that piece. It's not really close, but we don't need it to. There. It's just what we needed. That turned out really, really well. The one I made right before that, though, when I was setting this up, turned out just a little bit straighter, so I'm going to use that one. Doesn't make any difference, they're both fine. So that, and go over there, probably under the springs to be better, and it will fit just snugly over that. And because it's a little bit flexible, when I max out, it won't hurt that, but I'm still going to put a limit stop in it. And we're getting full throttle here. So far, so good. Now, when I go to full throttle with it, it's a little bit too far down, so I think I'm just going to rotate that back just a little bit, and we can use heat to adjust these springs. I've got that adjusted a little bit better. Now I've got a lot more comfortable full throttle position, but obviously the idle is a little bit advanced, so that means this spring's pulling us too far that way. We're just centering it by doing that. And you just get a propane torch. And don't heat up the whole thing, just a little bit. And that spring will become a little bit stronger than this one. You'll see it move. There you go. Almost. Little tiny bit. That's gonna do it. Get on over to it. I need to make a little bit more room on that side for my arm when it comes down through there. It's a little bit snug, so I've got this big washer here, and I basically traced around a pattern, and I'll trim that out. A couple of minutes with the die grinder, and we got what we're looking for here. I found this little box to protect these gimbals. It's a little bit too big for that location, but it looks like it'll fit two of these if I cut it in half. And I can use one for that and one for the elevator and aileron. I'll just have to make a cap for the open end. The best way to put that on there is like that, so that I can feed the wires in on this side and then down. And I can't weld it there because the gimbal's got to go in that direction. I need it to be somewhat serviceable. So I need to make a bunch of L brackets because I don't have any. We'll use that and just chop them up. Probably weld them to the plate and then pop rivet them to that box, question mark. We'll see how it goes. There, now I've got some hardware. Hey, you know what? Forget that. I just spotted them 2 holes in there. So I'm just gonna run 4 bolts through the corners, nuts on, and be done with it. A little bit of black spray paint, clean that thing up like a dirty boy on a Sunday morning. The throttle gimbal is installed. Now I just have to put one of these covers in place. These are the 2 screws that control the tension on the gimbal, and the one with the little notch in it is what controls the little ratcheting action on the throttle. With them loosened back up, the action is smooth as silk. Got the full throttle stop in place. It's just a matter of adjustment. There's a bolt on the bottom to lock it in place. Make another one for the idle side. That'll make the stop for the rear. I had to make sure I had room enough down there for my arm when it went to full throttle. Now the gimbal comes back to idle just before the throttle arm does, which is what you want. That way the spring tension can hold the motor at idle. This ought to mount the gimbal to the rudder pedal assembly quite nicely. Luckily for me, there's a hole right in the middle of that thing, so I was able to line it up and then just move my hole up about a 1/4 inch to get it where it needed to be. Now I just need to file that out a bit. I'll weld that to the bottom, and that lines up with that really, really well. Okay, that's looking pretty good so far, but I need to check something before we get to welding anything. Oh, yeah, that ain't gonna work, is it? Nope. All right, back to the drawing board. So I think that the simplest way to go about this thing, instead of moving this whole assembly out and then making a linkage in between, or maybe putting this thing somewhere else entirely, is to simply go up with the foot position right off of this thing. I just need to make a plate that goes up like a foot pedal, which I was kind of wondering what to do about a foot pedal anyway, so I guess we'll get to work on that. This thing is proving to be just about as difficult as predicted. The motion here just, yeah, backwards. Anyway, the motion here just isn't quite right, because this thing wants to ride like it's on a ball. It's not like a slider, like on an equalizer on a radio or something. That would be convenient. So by the time it gets down there, it's farther away than there, because this thing is also on a pivot on the opposite side. So that didn't work. And then I thought, well, what about getting it involved with this? I'm ahead of myself. Because now the axle here lines up just like we did with the throttle networks, but we just don't have enough travel here to do that. I thought about maybe a pivot here and then like a ball joint, and that was really quite promising, but I don't feel like building a ball joint, although I may come back to that. So what I think I might have to do is a good old-fashioned pivot that would amplify motion. Still working on that. I'll figure it out. All right, now I really need to know what the throw is on that. So here's what we do. We'll put the base of that down on there and zero it. And still at 0, yes. And we'll take that all the way down to the bottom of the stroke. And I got about 18 and a half. All right, let's go again. Zero that. I set it on the piano instead of on the bracket. That's why there's a change in the number. All right, let's go ahead. Oops. And hold that there. All right, and I got 19.91, so I'm going to go about 18 and a half. 19 right in that area. So over here, I'm going to try to do the same. And see what we got, 0. And we'll get a shove up there, and I got 21. So we're getting pretty close with this thing clamped on there at that length. I suppose I could get this thing oriented in there somehow and make this bend down and go through a hole. Perhaps we'll work on the finer details. I think I'm gonna make the hole a little big and put a rubber grommet in there and then let the thing right in the grommet. Well, I think with a couple of 90-degree brackets, I can get that gimbal lined up with the center of this. I'll scoot that over a little bit to do that, but that's okay. And I want to make this bend that way so that it's 90 degrees from the top of that pedal. Bend that bottom bracket up in order to get what we're looking for there, which is pretty close. That's about how you do that. There, now I can get a hole in that thing for the gimbal stick, and I have to set that just about in the perfect spot so that I don't get over travel or under travel, because it's going to be pretty close. I'd like to have it a little bit over so that I could put a stop in it like I did with the throttle. I don't want it to have under travel because then I don't have as much control. I'll adjust that as needed to get it. So when I go up with it, it just is enough there to catch, and any more it'll bind up, and when I go down with it, it's going to kick it out of there. Yep. So I need to not crush it. I need to turn that end of that thing into a ball. and make a ball joint in there some kind. And I don't have a lathe, so I'm gonna spin it with that and go find a file or something to shape it with. Okay, rounding that off helped a whole lot with the way it has to move inside that hole, but it was binding up towards the top and the bottom of the motion. So I used a step bit and made it a little bit bigger, which helped with that. So what I would like to do though is to keep about the same diameter as that. We can flip this around, just use that for a bolt hole or whatever. For a weld, it doesn't matter. I'm gonna drill it and then hog it out in both directions like that to put that shape on it so it'll move through the entire stroke a little bit better, I hope. Right, now we're getting closer to something that's a lot more functional. This is not easy, but it's fun. I've been fooling around with this thing all morning, and I got full travel up just fine, and full travel down just fine. It's really close to kind of coming out of there though. And I've been fooling around with like that angle and this one and this one. I think the best solution is just to scab a piece onto this and make that side thicker on the top half of that. You know what, I was so focused on getting that full travel up and down, which I have, that I neglected the play that I've got in there. That's just not gonna work. Nuts. I'm gonna revisit this grommet idea. I kind of think that will work. I just put that in an L bracket, quite similar to the one that I just had to grind off of that rudder pedal. I'm gonna revisit this grommet idea. I kind of think that will work. I just put that in an L bracket, quite similar to the one that I just had to grind off of that rudder pedal. Say that looks pretty good so far. That little groove at the end of the transmitter stick fit right through that hole too. I think we got something here that'll function. Probably put a little grease in there or something. Well, that looks promising. However, you know, one reason that I've shown some of the many things that didn't work in this video is because it's not easy to do, and I don't want people to think that I'm just doing this the first time off. Usually the first idea doesn't work. You run into stuff like this thing wants to move further away from the rudder pedal as it goes up and down. So hopefully that rubber is enough to compensate for it. Well, I just took the stick off entirely and set it aside, and wouldn't you know it, this thing started working. I wish it wasn't as crunchy as it is, but, well, it'll work. Finally, this thing, I was starting to wonder. I wasn't going to give up on the thing, but my goodness. Both of the limiters are in place. Pretty simple design. The gimbal is protected from excess movement. Now I just got to bolt it down and then make a cover for it. I found a cover. It's about time I caught a break too. That thing fits good. It'll go in there pretty easy. That cover should keep anything from damaging that gimbal. Yeah, so I didn't check that switch, but it doesn't work. So that one's junk. And I gotta start over. Luckily, I've got a new switch and tube and grip, and that switch is different. And I had to grind it down so that I could actually get that piece out of the way. But I like the sound of that one better. I like how that heat shrink just kind of holds that right where it needs to be for me. I don't have to worry about it. I just trimmed it out so that I could operate the switch. Yeah, I wound up getting that a little bit too thin, so I just cut it off. Figured out I'd figure a different way to run a trigger on it. But the whole thing is a little bit too small for my hands. So I got the back off the other one, and now it fits me better. If you squeeze it, you can get the trigger to go, but that's not what I'm going for here, so I gotta refine this a little. We'll see what I come up with. I haven't settled in on that or anything, but I did kind of want to know how much weight was on this thing. So it was about, nice glare on there. That ain't bad. £1.50. I actually think I'm going to attach that way. I put a slice in there so that you can manipulate the trigger more easily. It's not the prettiest thing, but it's quite comfortable. Well, I got that one stuck together, and I think it's a little bit lighter than the other one. Biggest problem I'm having with this old fart cart is it's too doggone short. I need to make it longer. So the simplest way is just to cut it about here, and then hopefully I got a pipe in the trailer that will extend it for me and make a limousine old fart cart. All the stuff's in the trailer is coming in here because that trailer is going. Unfortunately, so is all this free space. In case I can't find a pipe the right size, that thing just might get it. It's a ladder from my daughter's bed thing. We had her at homeschool. There was this desk underneath it. It's really kind of cool. Before I even go looking out there for that pipe, I noticed the way this thing is built with the structure, that thing is attached in such a way where I can get rid of this front hoop thing, which is largely what's in my way. This thing is just too scrunched up. But if I can cut that hoop out of there, retain the steering, now I got more room for my feet and that whole rudder pedal assembly. I still got to figure out where to put the instrument panel, and that thing is right where that ought to be. But it can fold out of the way or something, or maybe I can just come at it from underneath and tow it like an airplane, which is kind of what got my attention to begin with. I don't know, we'll see. If it was summertime, I would have welded that there, but 6 bolts ought to hold it. I just don't need that kind of vapor in here, and I'm not moving the snowbank out of the door to get this thing outside. I got that front little hoop cut off, and I don't know, I might reattach it later. I think I found something to make them rudder pedals out of. Well, they're pretty. I guess they're $10 at a garage sale at one point. Now, it looks like because of the shape of that ski, I'm not going to need a riser of any kind on that. I will need a spacer to make up the gap down there to get these to set in there flat. But I'd say I'm on the right track with these ski rudder pedals. I needed to add 2 little pieces of steel here and then grind a whole bunch off of that one to get these pedals to sit level. I figured out if I put a little piece of felt rolled up inside each one of them springs, it cuts the noise in there way, way down. There. I got the rudder pedals in place. Time to clean this place up and get that stuff installed on the frame. The rudder pedals are sitting there just about how I want them. It's a pretty comfortable angle for me. I just got it blocked up with a 2x4 for a second, and with that crossbar I can weld that to the frame, and then I've got an attachment point for the rudder pedal assembly. Then I think I'll probably cut the frame here and then bend it up to meet about where I want it and weld it there. I welded a bar across there, and then I cut a chunk out of there on both sides so I could bend that frame up, and then I'll weld it again, finish up the nose. And yeah, I'll go ahead and attach that hoop right there. It just seems like it should be there to wrap it up. That's better. Now it's time to attach the throttle control. Yep, that's lots more comfy. Alright, so I got this frame thing. I'm not sure. I had 2 of these things on it. I cut them off. I'm pretty sure I can hold the throttle up with that. It's just about where it needs to be. And stuff is lining up pretty good down there, so I can get some decent attachment points with it. So I think we'll work off of that. That looks like it's just kind of made for that thing to sit there. Very comfortable. All right, now I just gotta order another gimbal to do the stick for the aileron and elevator. We'll figure out how to attach that to this contraption. Trust me, a little bit of black spray paint goes a long ways on something like this. Okay, one of the bigger challenges that I'm having is to figure out how to integrate the transmitter into the cockpit, and hopefully in such a way where it just doesn't really look like the transmitter anymore. I need to move almost everything on it to somewhere else. because when you've got the transmitter in your hand, they locate the switches where you can get to them quite easily while you're flying or boating or driving, whatever you're doing with it. And I need to move those switches for the same reason, so that I can get a hold of them while I'm flying. Only trouble is, a lot of this stuff is a little bit too integrated. Like these 10 and these 2 pots here, I can move those easily. Same thing with the gimbals. But the trim switches, those are stuck to a circuit board, as is this keypad and the 2 switches that are in the back. I would really love to move those. Those 2 in the back, I would like to just get a hold of them from the throttle. And I don't think I can move them. I might try it, we'll see. However, for now, I'm gonna have to build this thing into a dash of some kind where I can still see the screen and get to this stuff, yet move these and hopefully the 2 in the back and figure out a place to put all of it. Should be fun. I got the transmitter open so we can have a better look inside of it. I don't know if I'll be using the sliders or not, but I'll be relocating quite a few of the switches over to the throttle area. And I'll be trading out a couple of the 3-position switches for momentaries and probably another 2-position. I've got a little paper over there. I'm working out what I want to put where. And I'm going to talk to Jose about antennas, longer range stuff, and see if I need to get longer ones or what's required to do that. And other than that, it's basically a matter of cutting the wire and making it longer, connecting it to the other gimbal or to the other switch, or connecting it back to the switch when you relocate it, whatever the case is. But I've got to be able to have access to the area in the back so that I can charge it, get to the SD card, and I've got to be able to see the screen and get to the trim and to the keyboard at the bottom, and have access to several of the switches right near my flight controls. So it's going to be kind of a project. I got the stick side of the frame kind of assembled there. I've got to cut that thing off still. It was basically a hoop. It was for the garbage cans on the back of a riding lawnmower, and I just cut it 3 spots, right in the center, and then here and there, turned it that way and made it the right length, welded it back together. And now I've got a good place to bolt this plate. That'll hold the gimbal right in this area somewhere. I might have to put it up at an angle, whatever, but it's quite sturdy. Now I can put the chair back in it. Got the control stick in place. Just some JB welding in there, making sure it'll stay put. And I basically got this thing framed out at this point. I spotted one of these things hanging off the shelf, and I'll try to improve on that one a little bit. It'll fly, but I could probably do better. And if I do, I'll put this in. If it's later, then I'll make a different video about it. So I've got all the basic controls for the cockpit in place and in a comfortable location. I started to put switches in. I figured the throttle cut can go there. And then I want a 3-position for, let's see what's on the list down there, the rates and for the flaps. And I'd like to get that where I can reach it. So I was thinking of putting a bracket on this throttle arm that would hold that switch right about there, so that I could reach over there and just click it. And put a couple of those in a row. Might add a 3rd one for who knows what, but it's better to have it not need it than to need it and not have it. So it looks like I'm gonna have to lose that front spring, which makes the throttle a little bit heavier, which would be okay, except for the stick is very, very light. I'm not quite sure if I can fix that yet. I found that bracket, I don't know what from. I bent it 90 degrees right there. And if I put it in right there, like that, I can mount the switches on the face of it, and the throttle will still operate I just need to trim it back just a little bit so that the full throttle stop is in the right spot. I got the first of 4 switches mounted in that plate. That random hole was just a random hole. It happens when you're using stuff like this to make stuff out of. And it's close, but that's nice. That works out pretty well. I get a hold of it here, and then that one there, and I'm thinking about putting this one right in here as a momentary for the spoiler runs. Gonna use that one for the momentary instead of that bigger one. I think it's a little bit more appropriate for this type of a wiring setup. Okay, I'm gonna revisit this spring because I want some resistance on that and a way to kind of center it. And I kind of like the way it acts, even though it's not tied down. When I kind of pinch it there with my other hand, I like the way it acts. So I'm going to attach it where it meets the grip in the center with some JB weld and see how this works. With that JB weld in there, we got the spring centered around that core, and hopefully that will keep this thing centered and with a little bit of resistance. This thing turned out really well. I was going to attach it to the base, but I'm not going to. I like the way it acts better this way. It puts the thing in the center, or at least close enough to count, and it gives me a little tension in every single direction. When I clamp it down there, it's just a little bit too much. Now I've just got to figure out where to put these 2 sliders. Part of the trick is I haven't used it, so I'm not sure what I want to use it for. They work great for flaps. All right, let's go over these controls. I moved the 2 sliders from the side of the transmitter to this bracket. They clear the throttle, but I can still use them if I need them. They don't move, but it's the best I could do. I've got a 2 position here for a throttle cut. I've got a 2 position right here for landing gear, a 3 position for a timer, 3 position for flaps, 3 position for rates. Over here I've got a momentary for spoiler runs, and on the stick side I've got a trigger momentary for rockets and a momentary for bombs. The stick, throttle, and rudders are all in place, and now I just need to design an instrument panel to hold the screen, the power button, the trims, and the control board. I decided to finish up the frame so that I had a place to mount the instrument panel onto. Seems like it'd make more sense to do it in that order. The steering column is right in the way, so I'm going to take it off right there. It looks like there's a couple of bolts and I can undo it rather than just have to lop it. And then I got to figure out how to get this thing involved with it. With the back of the transmitter, it's easier than handling the whole thing. I figure I'm going to just mount that right to the board, and I don't have to worry about interference with the antennas from some metal frame. Everything should be far enough away. I just punched a couple of holes in and drove that down with a big old hammer. The shell is mounted to that board. I've got a cutout there in the bottom for the battery. Thing's mounted high enough so that it won't interfere with the antennas, and the neat thing about wood is just a couple of screws and you're done. Okay, I've begun wiring it. Started with the spoiler run, ran it through a grommet in that hinge, another one in the frame, another one out there, and I have to wind up there with that in the transmitter along with all of the aforementioned switches. Well, that is one heck of a wiring harness. Wraps all the way around through, goes under the seat, back up and over to the stick. There are 6 little wires on the gimbal, 1 for each pot. That motion goes to that pot, and that's the elevator. The other side goes to the aileron. So I've got servo wires. I've got 3 wires in them. One to the elevator and 1 to the aileron. Same thing with that side. Got 1 for the throttle, and then there's 1 for the rudder down that way. So it's just connecting the dots for like a few hours. Just solder them up one circuit at a time. Making really great progress with this wiring harness here. It kind of tucks in, it doesn't touch anything anywhere. It doesn't pull on any of the connections at all. I've got transmitter kind of zip tied right here just to hold it while I start with all these connections in here from all those wires right over there. Got this transmitter wired in, and I'm hoping like heck that everything works, but it's late and I'm not checking it tonight. I've got a video for reference that I need to change in the hardware screen. Some of these switches from 3-ways to 2-ways and to momentaries, and I don't have them all marked, so I'm gonna have to figure this out. I've got a good teardown video to watch though, so I've got a reference point. Got the shell put together for a minute. Anyway, I gotta wait for that other gimbal to show up. So I'll put that in there and then I'll plug in that one antenna. If you've ever had one of these apart, you know what I'm talking about. Very happy with the result. Probably noticed I dropped that thing down about a foot. Just thought it looked better overall. And because I dropped it down a foot, I had to put it at a little bit of an angle, because before it was higher and the screen was tipped in a little bit to keep it shaded a little bit. That was intentional. But with it low, that didn't work. So here we are. Once that gimbal shows up, I'll connect everything up and then reassign 3 of these switches that I turned from a 3 position to momentaries and a 2 position. And hopefully everything will work. Okay, the trigger is that one. The bomb is that one. Throttle is backwards because the idle goes there. Let's see. Okay, that's the rates. Okay, there it is. That would be what I said was the flap.
Timer on. Timer on.
That's not showing up.
Timer on.
But it knows that's a 2 position. It should be a 3 position. That will be the blue one. Let's see.
Clear prop. Throttle disabled.
That's correct. And that's the spoiler on. So it's probably got to be changed in hardware. Well, so far, everything on this thing works.
Welcome to Ethos. Throttle disabled. Shit is about to get real.
I've got control of the ailerons, control of the elevators, the rudders work,
Flaps down.
throttle works,
Clear prop.
throttle works with the throttle cut.
Disabled.
And I've got a good deal of these callouts already set.
Spoiler open. Spoiler closed. Spoiler open. Flaps down. Spoiler closed. Flaps up. Flaps down. Spoiler closed. Flap. Ethos. Throttle disabled. Shit is about to get real.
Well, so far, everything seems to work on it.
Deployed. Deployed.
I've got most of the callouts set,
Flaps down.
if not all of them.
Closed. Flaps up. Flaps down.
All the controls seem to work just fine. I've got elevator control, I got aileron, rudders, and throttle.
Clear prop.
All the switches seem to function, so tomorrow I'll hook it up to an airplane and see what we get. So far, everything seems to function on it. I've got elevator control, aileron, got rudder.
Flaps down. Throttle disabled. Clear prop.
I got throttle. Most of my callouts are set.
Spoiler open. Spoiler closed.
So far, so good. Tomorrow, I've got to do something about it, because if you're not careful, it'll tip over and crash, so we don't want that. Well,
Flaps down.
preliminary checks, everything seems to work. I've got aileron, elevator, I've got rudder, a throttle.
Throttle disabled.
I've got
Flaps
most
down.
of my callouts are where I want them. I suppose tomorrow I'll hook it up to an airplane and give it a proper check. At this point, I need to grab another can of spray paint and finish this thing out.
Flaps down.
And it wants to tip over real easy, so I need to figure that out. And might need to put some bigger tires on this thing because my sidewalk out there is really kind of sandy. Might put some landing gear on it.
Flaps
We'll see.
down.
Oh yeah, and the steering. I've got to figure out some kind of a steering mechanism for it. This thing is about as tipsy as a drunk redneck in a canoe. So I'm going to change the wheels out. I pulled the rear end out. I wanted to get a couple of bicycle wheels out the backyard, but they're buried in the snow like I can't even see them. There's a couple on that, a couple tires on that, but I need the dolly. I reckon I'll borrow those for a minute. I'll go to Harbor Freight and get some new ones. And I need to make the wheelbase a little bit wider because, yeah, it'll crash. So you gotta be careful with it. That was really straightforward. I didn't have to change the length of the axle or anything. I just drilled out those wheelie bars and kind of installed it there. So the tippy problem is caused by these front wheels, which I hate to lose them because they look like they belong on an airplane. The stickers crack me up. They got these warning do not copy stickers all over this thing. Coming from a group of people that have been notorious for copying everything and then making it cheaper to take over the market. Anyway, the axle shaft is a little bit too high to deal with the frame. I'm gonna have to go down a little bit, but if I weld that axle shaft right to the bottom of this thing, I should have it, and we'll see if and how badly it interferes with this bar over there. If it does, we'll figure it out. Got that axle welded up. Let's get, oop. That axle's welded up. It ain't pretty, but I don't really care. Let's get it bolted in. I had to add a copper sleeve to get the right diameter. It's just some plumbing pipe. Well, just like I had foreseen, there ain't enough room for the thing. It takes care of the tippy problem, so I just got to move the fork forward and put the steering assembly underneath of this front nose thing. Best place to put that turned out to be right in the front. I got about half welded. I'm only doing a section at a time so I can cool it off with a wet rag and not torch them bearings. Just welding the front fork right to that front hoop, and then I'll put another vertical brace in for strength. I'm only welding one side at a time so I can cool it back off so we don't fry them bearings. It's February 19th, 2026. I thought this thing was finished, but I'm not getting enough return on the rudder pedals, so I need to add a spring. And the space is limited in here, as you can probably imagine. And the only place I have to put it is right about here. I figure I can borrow the stop and keep it as a stop if I put a spring on it. And I found a spring out of an Armalite rifle that just fits over that head, but it'll get caught if it needs to move up and down, which it does. So I found a cylinder that fits right down in that spring, and I basically epoxied it to an identical bolt. Filed it around a little bit to make sure it was smooth, and I'll just have to replace the one on each side. And again, like I did here, I'll just notch this to accept the spring. Now that I've got those two installed, I'll have to cut the keeper notches in the bottom of the rudder pedals and figure out the length of the spring. So at this point, I need to go along that plane and that plane and make a little notch to accept the spring on each side of that thing. And I can't get the die grinder in there, it won't fit. I don't feel like taking the whole thing apart. And I don't want a saber saw in there ripping the whole thing apart. So, we'll do a rare thing. We take apart the hacksaw and put the blade in there upside down, which usually works fine if you're not trying to make a video. There, we got it. And then tighten that back up. A little more. Okay. Now I can make a mark on it on each side of that and then reorient myself where I'm more comfortable and I can see what I'm doing and cut the 2 slots to retain that spring. Well, that's wrapped up. Just made a little slot in each side for that, and then I drilled a hole to poke the top through to keep it from going anywhere. Did the same thing on both sides and adjusted it until I got the center. It is March 9th, 2026, and I had to add a support plate for that spring. And I just used the end cap from a cardboard tube to do it with some JB weld. I just cut it out to fit around the box that's underneath. I didn't know when I built this original mount that I was going to use that spring. And so I had no way to predict that, unfortunately, or I would have just moved the thing over. Stuff like that happens. A little bit of black spray paint, this thing's ready to fly. Picked up a set of tires from the Harbor Freight, along with some black zip ties. Went over to Menards and got a can of black spray paint, cleaned this thing up. It works. I'll show the functionality of it in a second. But I guess I wound up with a lifted limousine old fart cart with a cockpit on top. So when I fly, I can pretend that I NZ F-16. So this is kind of a tricky thing to film, but rudders, those are functional. Elevators, ailerons. Don't get too crazy with the throttle, but that works. As well as spoiler runs and flaps. Oop, I gotta put the slow up and down back into that, but otherwise, yeah. Timer, everything. Ready to fly. I've always wanted one of these things.